Wagga Women's Health Centre was established in the late 70s, 40 years ago, by men and women in the community who could see a need for services. The Wagga Women's Health Centre is part of the statewide non-government women's health sector. We provide services that encompass trauma counselling, crisis and support work, health education, economic wellbeing. We have visiting practitioners that provide massage. Other services in town provide sessions from our centre as well. We have a library and women can come and sit and be safe in our environment.
Anxiety is where you feel overwhelmed and unable to use your emotional regulation to bring you back into your safe space.
Anxiety is the reaction from something that gives you stress. So it's about getting stuck in that stressed space to the point that it impacts on your capacity to do other things.
Anxiety is our response to feeling overwhelmed when we detect that there could be danger around. So when we move into a space that may not feel so comfortable, we can start to feel a little anxious, and then that may build into something that is becoming more dangerous.
Stress is the body's emotional reaction to an event that has occurred where there needs to be an emotional adjustment or change.
Stress comes from worry, comes from a past experience of something that hasn't gone as well as you expect. It's anticipation about what might occur. Stress can happen from an overload of too many things to think about.
Stress is what we act out when we're feeling overwhelmed. So our stress becomes that response to what is occurring at that time.
Stress and anxiety can look different for every individual involved. So for someone it might look like the decrease in emotional social interactions. It could be isolation. It can also have an effect on someone's self-confidence, self-worth and self-esteem. It can also look like walking on eggshells or just not feeling quite comfortable in the space in which you're actually interacting and having a response to or reading into a situation in a way to try and protect yourself from what's occurring.
It can look a whole range of things, and it will depend upon each individual person. So what might be stressful or anxious for one person may not be for another.
So it can look like a whole range of different things. From our perspective, anxiety, if we're thinking about anxiety as the medical form of it, we're looking at perhaps hypervigilance, which is really an impact from trauma stress. And that can look like a feeling of walking on eggshells. It can be chaos, a general sense of chaos, even though you try really hard to get things in order, to have things under control. It seems like there's difficulty when you're making decisions to know what the outcome is going to be. So even things that you know can become really difficult. It can impact on all the major organs. So things like feeling your stomach's in a knot or there's weight on your chest.
Stress and anxiety can impact on people very differently. It can impact in any ways from employment to social settings to also presenting in the body through ways that we know that trauma presents in forms of medical conditions and diagnoses.
They can impact on a person by the way that people perceive themselves, their self-esteem and their self-worth. It can also impact on their actions and what they do and what they feel comfortable to do.
So it impacts on your capacity to do the normal stuff that you want to do. Taking care of the kids, looking after your house, taking care of all the things that you need to do, the bills, that sort of thing. It can make it difficult to work. It can make it difficult to form and maintain friendships or to be in your community.
A trigger can be an event or it can be an occurrence that happens that triggers off memories or flashbacks that can travel us back in time to an event that happened. It can be sound, sight, smell. It can be somebody's voice that takes us back to a moment where we were in danger. we think about triggers, we also think about our flight, fight, freeze response and how that impacts on our feelings of anxiety as well. So those fight, flight, freeze will depend upon our safety and where we're sitting within that safety zone, and how we use those fight, flight, freeze to respond to what's occurring. The window of tolerance is a way of looking at our responses to trauma.
So the window of tolerance is the space between hypervigilance, which is anxiety, that elevated view, and hypovigilance, which is depression, feeling really low. So the space in between that, where things are going okay.
The window of tolerance is a space that is in regards to the hyper state, hypo state, and also in regards to the window of clarity. So when we're in the window of clarity, that is where we're able to make our most emotionally regulated decisions. So they're decisions that are actually where we need to sit. It's where we have that clarity and that space to think through the decision that we're going to make without reacting in either a hyper or a hypo state.
Our window of tolerance begins with looking at the window of clarity. So in the middle here, we have the window of clarity. This is also our safe place. This is where things make sense. We don't have that fog of uncertainty around us. Up the top here, we have our hypervigilance or our hyper space. This is where our anxiety sits. This will look like walking on eggshells, feeling like we can't breathe, elephant sitting on our chest, feeling like we want to run. That constant space of feeling really unsure that there's danger around. Down the bottom, we have our hypo space or our hypovigilance. This is where we see depression sit. That can look like wanting to hide, wanting to check out, wanting to become numb. It's also where we'll see our self-harm start to play. What we notice is that as we travel along, something will happen, we'll have a trigger, and we'll head up into the hyperspace. Then we'll assess our safety and start to come back down again. And something else will happen, and we're back up into that hyperspace again. From there, we'll keep traveling along until it becomes so overwhelming sitting in that anxiety space that we crash down into that depression state. What we want to do is look at how, when we're noticing we're in that anxiety space or we're in that depression state, how do we get back into that clarity? We know that that window of clarity will become less the more we sit within that anxiety space and the more we sit within that depression stage. So we need to look at how we're going to use our toolbox. What are the strategies that work when we notice that we're in anxiety? What are the strategies that work when we notice that we're in that depression? And how we use those to regain our clarity.
A survival toolbox is looking at the tools or the strategies that work for you. What are your interests? What are the things that you enjoy? What brings you a sense of safety? So that you develop your own individual toolbox that you can utilize at whatever time and whatever place when you notice that you're feeling anxious, that you can start to bring that back down and move into that window of clarity. It's important to help us to regulate those emotions and to be able to move into that window of clarity so we can make really good, clear decisions. When we're in that anxiety state, our decisions are based around survival and safety, whereas when we're in that window of clarity, we can actually make a broader, more succinct decision.
So our survival toolbox is a variety of strategies, skills, and items that we might need to use that will assist us in returning to clarity. So when we've been triggered and we've either gone up into a hyper or a hypo state, the toolbox is something that we can delve into, pull out in the situation that we're in, and use that as our way of returning to the space that we need to be. Emotional regulation is the ability to respond to the ongoing demands of experience with a range of emotions in a manner that is socially tolerated and significant to that person and allows them to remain safe.
Emotional regulation looks at how we self-soothe, how we take a notice of where we're sitting on that window of tolerance, whether we're feeling anxious, whether we're feeling down, and how we regulate that and come into a space that feels more normal for us.
Emotional regulation is really important. What it does is it ensures that someone is able to return to that clarity space in the window of tolerance and also act and get to safety, whether that's emotional or physical.
It's a very individual thing of how to manage stress and anxiety. It's finding what works for you, what helps soothe, what helps calm, what are enjoyable things to do that are safe.
Absolutely, but it's a skill. You have to learn how to do it. It's not just something you're born with. And that can come through experience, either by talking to a friend, through growing up and learning how to deal with challenges. But when it gets to that elevated level and you're kind of stuck in those spaces, then generally some formalised help is a way through recovery.
Managing stress and anxiety is extremely different for every person involved. What works for one won't necessarily work for another. What it's about is actually looking at ourselves and starting to acknowledge the impacts that stress and anxiety is having on our body and how we react to a situation when it occurs. If we are able to actually pick up that our stress levels or our anxiety levels are increasing, we are then able to put the strategies in place around mindfulness, grounding and self-care to be able to bring us back into that clarity space, because what we know is clarity is where we are safe and we can actually make an informed decision that is right for us. Managing stress and anxiety is a very individual thing. What works for one will not necessarily work for the other. It's about recognising the signs and symptoms of our stress and anxiety and putting strategies into place. These strategies can look like anything from breathing techniques, using our grounding techniques, which can include reconnecting to the ground by looking at our feet and remembering where we're at. Can also be things like going for a walk, ringing a friend, writing or reading a book, things like that. There's a variety of strategies in place, and it's about working out what works for us in that moment to allow us to return to that space of clarity.
Managing the stress and anxiety can look like developing a toolbox of strategies that work for you. It could be going for a walk, it could be listening to music, it could be looking at a garden, smelling the flowers, it could be reading a book, it could be going for a run. It's identifying those strategies that work for you.
So it could be having someone to talk to through counselling or support. It could be through case management and identifying that when there's hypervigilance or hypovigilance, that things can seem very disorganised. And learning the skill to become organised once again it may take the assistance of someone else, but it's a challenge, but it's certainly doable.
Talking to a professional, breathing, learning and implementing grounding techniques, finding your facts in a situation so you can return to clarity, learning and acknowledging your warning signs, understanding your body's response and reactions.
Grounding is a term that we hear a lot of and has become a bit of a buzzword, but ultimately what it means is to get back to yourself, to get back to what you know to be something that works for you. So it could be to feel the ground underneath your feet. It could be to feel centered within yourself. So it's looking at how do we move from that anxiety state back down into that clarity space and feel calm again.
So grounding is a form of emotionally regulating what's going on. When we get stuck doing something time and time again, it creates a neural pathway. I kind of liken it to a 6-lane highway. The more you do it, the stronger it becomes, to the point where you're no longer really thinking about it. When we ground, when we do something that brings us back to the here and now, it disrupts that neural pathway. That weakens that pathway and helps you to create a new neural pathway that is more in line with what your goals are and what you set for yourself. If we were using that same analogy, what we're looking at creating is a jungle pathway. So it's difficult, it's challenging to do something completely different when you can see that the pathway that you've been using is right there, and it's easy, you don't have to think about it, but it doesn't take you to where you want to go. safety is about building the capacity to regulate and be in an okay space without the impact of triggers, reacting to those impact of triggers. So safety is going to be unique to everyone, but it's important as a first step in working with any client in any field, is really establishing safety first and foremost.
Safety plays a huge role because our anxiety is built on not feeling safe. So by looking at our safety and establishing safety, we're able to come back down and feel able to make decisions that are going to work for us.
Safety is really important. If you're feeling unsafe, what we know is that the impacts of stress and anxiety will actually increase for the individual involved. So finding safety in whatever that is, whether that's through relocating to a different spot, breathing, or using Psychadia's survival toolkit, safety is really important.
The key factors are remembering that everybody is individual and we're going to move in and out of those stages the way that we need to. That we do move in and out of those stages. We don't stay in those stages all the time. And that the more aware we are of where we're sitting within those stages, the more control we can have on returning to clarity.
So the window of tolerance, or the space for clarity, is a sense of being here and now. It's learning that hypervigilance and hypovigilance can be managed, and assisting someone to be in a space where they can have the confidence and trust in themselves to make great decisions for themselves, to be able to learn, create, argue, debate, all of those wonderful high functioning activities. I think the most important, starting point to that is recognising that hypervigilance and hypovigilance are really normal states to create safety for yourself. So it's the brain working wonderfully well at keeping you safe. If we acknowledge that they're normal and that's okay, part of that demedicalising this response to trauma then becomes a part of it. It's not that you're broken or that there's something wrong with you, it's that your brain's just doing a really great job trying to keep you safe.
I think the key factors to remember are that we're always going to go in and out of the different stages of the window of tolerance, and that's okay and it's normal. It's okay that we're going to sit in the anxiety state, and it's okay that sometimes we're going to sit in the depressive zone or that numb space. It's how we move back into that window of clarity and the strategies that we put in place which is most important. It's also important that we remember not to judge people as they move through these stages. It is a process, and as we have experienced different traumas, people's anxiety and stress levels are going to change in accordance, and they will learn how to manage their own stress and anxiety, and focusing on what they need in their state is what's most important.